free-floating anxiety. Then you have all the so-called diseases, schizophrenia, bipolar depression, personality disorder, and all the way to suicidal ideation. So I want to go a little bit over that. And Punacha already acknowledged some of the people here, but Never Alone. Gabriella, who's been co-founder of Never Alone. Donna Meskova, who's been an amazing person to work with. Justin, who's not here, unfortunately, and Punacha leading the team. So thank you, team. It's a very small team, 5 people or less, but a lot has been accomplished. So, and Srini, I might ask you to comment as well. Srini Pillai is a Harvard psychiatrist who does a lot of work on AI and also anxiety. But as we look over the last 100 years, let's start with Freud. Freud started, the whole era of psychoanalysis. And then Carl Jung came along and took that a little further into what he called the collective unconscious and archetypes. And then there was the whole era of behavioralism, and then drugs, anti-anxiety drugs, psychotropic drugs, and even surgery, unfortunately sometimes very invasive surgeries like lobotomy, and most recently cognitive therapy and the School of Positive Psychology. So that's in short the history of how we've approached mental distress in the last 100 years. The sad part is none of these approaches has actually been very effective. People go to analysis, they keep going for 30 years. And, they never get over the fact that their mother didn't treat them well or something like that. And then, have all these innovative therapies come along, cognitive therapy, awareness-based cognitive therapy. And right now, the most fashionable thing is cognitive therapy and the School of Positive Psychology. And the results are dismal of every approach. So, having been interested in this for 35 years, so-called mind-body approach, I went back to the traditional Eastern wisdom traditions, both for how to approach chronic illness and how to approach mental distress. Eastern wisdom traditions, including Buddhism, but also Vedanta, which is the most ancient non-dual tradition in the world, and something called Kashmir Shaivism. And they all start with a completely different approach, which is not a disease model. You start with the light of awareness. All mental issues are created by the mind, so they cannot be tackled by the mind. You cannot cure something at the level of the problem. You have to go to a little higher level. And that's what the traditions of yoga and the non-dual traditions teach us. That fundamental reality is not your mind, is not your body, is not the experience of the world, but fundamental reality is a field of consciousness which in its simplest state, and maybe I can give you an experience of that in a little while, the simplest state of consciousness without any constructs, before consciousness knows itself as experience, and all experience is in the form of sensations, sense perceptions, images, feelings, thoughts, and the rest is a human story. Up until 40,000 years ago, there were 8 kinds of humans. And we call ourselves Homo sapiens, which means the wise ones. We were humble enough to give ourselves that name. But then we gave names to other species. And all humans had a language for 3 things: hunger, which is food, sex, mating, and danger. That's how we survive. And then one species, us, we created a language for stories. And that was the human civilization. Everything that we do now begins with a story. But stories also actually trap us into constructs that can be damaging. So the gift of self-awareness is both divine and diabolical. We can heal ourselves, but we can also do terrible things to ourselves. And the pandemic of mental distress, as I like to call it, not mental illness, because it's a broad spectrum, is leading not only to human suffering, but everything that we are doing, sleepwalking ourselves to extinction. Climate change, extinction of species, destruction of the ecosystem, destruction of the microbiome, which is absolutely necessary for our sustained biology, social injustice, economic injustice, mechanized ways of killing each other. Look at what's happening in Ukraine, but it's not only happening in Ukraine, Russia, it's happening everywhere in the world. So we are definitely sleepwalking to extinction, and there is no solution other than to wake up from this lucid dream that we call everyday reality. So the approach of the non-dual traditions is to go to a much deeper level, to the source of all experience, which I said is called pure consciousness. Okay. Let me just give you a little insight into what that might be. Okay. So right now, are you all listening to me? Can you be a little more enthusiastic, please? Okay. Okay. That's it. So now I'm going to ask you the same question, but please don't answer it. Please don't answer it till I raise my hand, okay? Are you listening to me?
Yes.
I said don't answer it. Simple instruction. I'm going to do it again.
Don't answer.
Are you listening to me? Please don't answer the question till I raise my hand. Are you listening to me?
Yes.
Okay, so what you experienced just now was the simplest state of awareness. When I ask you the question, are you listening? That's a thought. That's the mind. When you say yes, that's a thought. That's the mind. In between is you. And we call that simplest state of awareness. Okay, so now once again, I'm going to ask you the question, are you listening to me? And don't answer it, just slip into it. Are you listening to me? That's it. That's awareness. Now, if we abide in this awareness, it has gifts. See, right now, all the distress begins with recycled trauma. What is called anger is the memory of trauma. Hostility is the desire to get even. Anxiety is the anticipation of trauma all over again. Guilt, shame, depression, humiliation is blaming yourself and the loss of energy that occurs with that, which is physical. So the simplest state of awareness is what you just experienced. And this simplest state of awareness is a field of infinite possibilities. It's a field of correlation, synchronicity. It's a field of unpredictability. If I asked you, tell me what your next thought is going to be, you don't know. Okay, tell me what you're going to be experiencing tomorrow 3 p.m. emotionally, you don't know. Do you remember what you were experiencing 1 week ago at 4 o'clock in the afternoon Friday? You don't know. And yet in the moment, you're anxious. Okay, but when you're in the simplest state of awareness, you surrender to uncertainty, you have infinite creativity, you experience synchronicity, and you harness the powers of insight, intuition, creativity, higher consciousness, and transcendence. So that's the solution. to start from the source. And when we do that, there's certain things that happen. You don't focus on the problem, you focus on joy. And joy becomes the only measure of success. You start from there. You recognize that if you are in your simplest state of awareness, anytime you feel distress, ask yourself, where's this coming from? Is this my mind or is this my state of being? Because if you settle in your state of being, then there's empathy and compassion and equanimity and love. These are not mental states. These are our fundamental state of awareness. Then the solution is cultivating a joyful, energetic body, loving, compassionate heart, clear, reflective, creative mind, and lightness of being. Recognizing that the point of arrival is always now. And that when you recognize that the point of arrival is always now, there's the flow, transcendence, peak experiences, peak moments, and ultimately peak living. You experience gratitude as the most sane response to existence. Why do we exist? Why are we not surprised that we exist? I mean, imagine somebody taking their life with the gift of existence. And so we've gone terribly wrong in the last 100 years in our approach to well-being, both physically and mentally. And with that gratitude comes the unbounded flow of abundance. And you also recognize that there's no such thing as a permanent identity. We hang on to our identities, but what identity? You started as a fertilized egg, then you were a zygote, then an embryo, then a baby, a toddler. You say, I have a body, which one? I have a mind, which one? Yesterday's mind, the teenage mind. I have a personality. Well, I hope that's evolving, or you should run for president. Okay. So, when we recognize all this, then synchronicity is not an occasional thing. It's an every moment experience, because the world is synchronistic. Past, present, and future are human constructs based on linear interpretation of time, which is again a human construct. Space, time, energy, information, matter are all human constructs, derivatives of awareness. But we get stuck at the level of constructs without going to the source of constructs. So as we embark on this program, Never Alone, we want to go back to tradition. Tradition says, if you look at Buddha's teaching, he says, take refuge in the Dharma, which means your life purpose. Take refuge in the Buddha, which he doesn't mean himself. He means higher consciousness. And take refuge in the Sangha. And the Sangha is simply love in action. Love otherwise is just a mere sentiment and melodrama. But love in action is relevant. Love without action is irrelevant, and action without love is meaningless. So that's why we are creating this Sangha global. And we have lots of content. We have created content over the years. Chopra Global has a whole amazing plethora of content. But now we have to put it into action. And we have to do it through giving each other attention, which means deep listening, affection, deep caring, appreciation, deep gratitude, and acceptance. Not trying to change anyone. It's hard enough to change ourselves when we want to change. Okay, so that's this one aspect of our foundation's work. The second aspect is we're looking at longevity